Hello and welcome to this edition of Inside Tacoma. I'm your host, Randall Lewis. Our guest for our conversation today, City Councilmember Lillian Hunter. Welcome.
Thank you, Randy. I'm pleased to be here. Finally made it my way sitting down with you.
It's great to have a new council member here. You've been on for a few months now, so it's not, you actually do know how to find the council chambers in your office and all that sort of stuff. It's
on a
you're
good
not
day.
that new. But I have to ask new members when they come on for the first time, is it everything you thought it was going to be?
It's everything I thought it would be and more.
And more.
Yes, focus on the and more.
Drinking from a fire hose, I keep hearing that analogy. It's like drinking from a fire hose to be when you're a new council member.
I'm not going to argue with that. And so you just want to approach that carefully and develop a great thirst to make that work.
Okay. Now, you're a citywide council member, not representing a district.
Correct.
So you had to run citywide, and I'm always intrigued by the idea of knocking on someone's door and asking them, for a vote, but also saying, hey, what's on your mind? What is it that's concerning you or that you really like? Because I think that's, and I have no evidence to back this up, my supposition is that that's probably the most honest survey that's ever taken, is when a candidate knocks on a door and gets words from a potential voter about what it is that's on their mind, what's bothering them. Probably more accurate than any paper survey or phone survey or online survey that's ever done. So what was that like? I mean, and were you surprised by what people had to say to you?
Well, you're absolutely correct. It gets real at the door, if particularly for people who open the door and want to engage. And certainly in doorbelling, it's a bit humbling when people won't answer the door or shut the door in your face. That's also informative of what they might think of the political process. But in doing so, I quickly abandoned my stump speech, if you will, and shortened it to, I'm Lillian Hunter, I'm running for City Council. If I pull this off, tell me two things that I need to work on, but first tell me one thing that's really working for you in this city. And that always threw people off when the assignment was they had to tell me something good. But when it came to what were their concerns, what should I be working on, it very quickly narrowed down to two main subjects bubbled to the top, and that was safety and streets, or streets and safety.
Kind of the basics. Yeah.
It was consistent, and then just what's happening with our streets and what's happening with our police force and what attention to the level of safety in our communities, our neighborhoods, and in this house.
And what was the good thing that they would tell you?
Well, sometimes it took a little prodding. That's something good I have to talk about. And so then it was, I would ask, well, are you concerned, what do you think about the quality of the water that comes out of the tap? Well, it's great. So is that something that we can we can highlight there, that the water quality in Tacoma is good? Oh, absolutely. Then we also started, I would hear about the parks, local parks, people liked that. People liked having sidewalks where they could walk. They liked that they could get to their grocery stores, they could park. It was easy to get around Tacoma. And they were very fond of their schools, their individual schools. This is the school where my children went, or my children will go, or where I go. So there was a lot of pride in many things with Tacoma. And I think it's important, not only on the campaign trail, but as we're council members, to stop and just reflect on the really great things that make Tacoma a wonderful place to live. So I'm continuing to do that, not abandoning attention to the issues that we need to pay attention to as well.
Right. Well, it had to make you feel good when people talked about the schools being one of the things that they worked for, because that's kind of been your career for a long time.
It's been my career for a long time.
Principal of Oakland High School.
Yes.
Which let's talk about Oakland High School for a second, because if even longtime Tacoma folks might not know, well, wait a minute, there's Mount Tahoma, I noticed I started with Mount Tahoma. Mount Tahoma, there's Lincoln, there's Wilson, there's Stadium, and there's Foss. Well, what's Oakland? So let's talk about Oakland High School, where you were principal.
Well, Oakland is a hidden gem, and you're right, it doesn't float to the top when we think about high schools or the different schools in Tacoma. But let me just do a little backstory about Oakland and the other Oaklands that you find in cities and school districts across the state. We have a commitment to educate every student. And every student includes those that maybe see the world a little bit differently or march to the beat of a different drummer. And that's where Oakland High School comes into being. And it also is often referred to as the alternative high school. But it's a venue to address students that don't quite fit in with the traditional comprehensive high school. And it doesn't mean that those kids aren't capable, it doesn't mean they aren't smart, it means that they're probably facing some challenges that it's unfortunate for high school students to face. So the Oakland High School here in Tacoma and of the state provide a venue where those students can be successful too, because our goal is to make sure, not only as a school district, but statewide, that every student graduates high school ready for college and career. And I'll just throw in that I went on from Oakland High School to becoming the director of all alternative and online learning in the state of Washington. So I finished my career at OSPI, paying attention to making sure that we had quality venues in the alternative settings statewide.
And it has to be, I mean, to me, it's a great sense of growth in our education system, because I grew up in an era when all the school districts had were comprehensive high schools. Mm-hmm. And now, then Oakland came along. And now we have SAMI and SOTA and IDEA. I mean, the whole idea that not everybody fits into a giant school with 2,000 students, all just kind of like them, and that means they're all alike and they can fit in this model. The fact that we figured that out is kind of really gratifying. That I wish they would have maybe done it. I'm happy to have gone to Montahoma, but I mean, I wish they would have done it earlier. I mean, because it just makes so much sense that not everybody fits into those models.
Well, I think you're right. It's the idea that everybody's a square peg that's going to fit in there. You get a few round pegs in there, and it becomes challenging. But back in the day, there were some options there, Randy. They just weren't highlighted. They were kind of, I think, surreptitiously, students would be directed in different routes. Mm. And you and I were almost at Mount Tahoma at the same time.
Almost, yeah.
And for me personally, I was one of those kids. The dynamic was such that I needed to get something different than the traditional high school education. So by my senior year, I had finished all of my credits that I needed for graduation, a couple of required classes, and then I went off to Clover Park, then VTI. I spent my senior year in that alternative setting, learning a career and going to work eventually in the dental field as my first career. The other options at that time were military. So it was sort of you go to the VTI or you go to the military, but not really remaining part of the school district. So that's what's changed, and that's what's better. It's recognizing the kids have differences just like adults do, and instead of sending them off somewhere, embracing those differences and creating venues where they can be successful as well.
Right. And I want to point out to everybody that we went to the real Mount Tahoma, the original Mount Tahoma.
Absolutely.
The new one's much better than the one we went to.
I don't, no.
Oh, it's not on a swamp. For one thing.
Well, see, that's what's changed too. Yesterday's swamp is today's treasured wetland,
I agree.
So we could say that we were early adopters of appreciating wetlands.
Right. And I still think building California campuses is not in Tacoma, Washington is not a good style. But anyway, yeah. we'll talk about Montahoma again in detail sometime when the cameras are off. But I do want to focus something else on your history, because one thing that's kind of new in Tacoma, a lot of discussion amongst City Council about policy issues and even budget issues regarding immigration. And this is, and I'm not talking about being a welcoming city or being a sanctuary city or that whole debate. I'm just talking about the issue itself has become something the council's put money towards, has created a commission to deal with immigration affairs, and you coming along to be on the council about the time this is all happening is also kind of an interesting development, because you're an immigrant.
I am.
So let's tell the folks about this story, because I don't think everybody knows this.
I was born in Denmark and immigrated with my parents, went through the immigration process. And the backstory is my parents lived through the German Nazi occupation of World War II as young people and as teenagers. And when the war was over, they weren't completely convinced that that was a good place to stay. So they started planning early about immigration. And so they set their sights on the United States and Australia. And it was, my father was a bricklayer, and so my sister and I had been born by then. So their plans for immigration started before I was born, and so went a circuitous route to eventually end up in the United States. So yeah, we immigrated, and we first got visas to Canada, and we lived in Canada until we could get visas into the United States and residency here. And that entire process from when they started to plan immigration and moving to the United States until we got our citizenship was about 14 years.
14 years.
So it was never quick and it was never easy. And I think that's something that is sort of an unknown in the path to citizenship of how that process works. So now we fast forward into the new millennium, and we have a dynamic of immigration that means many things, including legal immigration and people who have come here through other means. And we have an issue that's not unique to Tacoma, it's nationwide, and clearly we need to look at immigration and immigration reform, not only in Tacoma, in Washington, but across the United States, so that the people who are here, regardless of how they got here, that want to be here, be citizens, contributing citizens, and they have their children here who have known nothing else but the United States. We have to put structures in place that accommodates that, and then bring our immigration policies and standards up to the new millennium to reflect the standards of what's happening today, not the standards that were in place in the 60s when my family immigrated here.
Right. And this kind of gets to the other issue about public safety that we talked about at the very beginning, which is one of the questions about how local communities interact with immigrant communities is very different than what the federal government's charged with doing. That's their responsibility to deal with the immigration system. At local level, we're just dealing with people who live in our city, and we want them to be able to trust to call the police department if something happens to them or something happens in their neighborhood, and to know that the police department is not the federal immigration system.
Correct. Well, let's talk frankly about the fear of immigrants with regard to the police. If I'm stopped for a traffic infraction, not that that would ever happen, but if I was, no one would ever, the probability that I would be asked if I was a citizen is slim to none.
Right.
That isn't always true for every immigrant that gets stopped for a traffic violation. And so it drills down to, why did you stop this person? Let's focus on the traffic violation if that's what it was there. And I think we have our areas of expertise, and unless something critical happens to change that conversation with an officer and someone who's been stopped, let's focus on the issue at hand of what a person was originally detained for or pulled over. And to ask the police department, who have such a critical role in our city, to add that component to their job description or the expectation, I think is unreasonable for the police as well. Right. They have their job, they want to do it, they want to do it well. And hopefully, I'd like to see where the city starts to focus its attention and resources into rebuilding our police department so that we have the staffing that we had 4 years ago. Still at a deficit with that. And with that, that allows us to have a police force that's strong enough that we can start to pull out cadres of that police force for the vital training in how to deal with interaction with immigrants, and also training in de-escalation techniques, conflict resolution, and the very important things that our peacekeepers need to be up to date on in our city. So, strong proponent of supporting the police department in that venue and not giving them additional duties that belong to another jurisdiction.
All right. And as we approach the second half of 2018, which is amazing that we're saying that, but that means you're going to start getting very heavy into the major responsibility of a city council, which is adopting a biennial budget.
Yes.
And the city manager has to give one to the council by a particular date in the fall, and I'm sure you and other council members have already been telling the city manager of things you'd like to have her include in that budget, and things that, like the staffing of the police department, are critical to you. And so I'm sure that one's there, but are there other things that you've learned in the time you've been on the council that saying, yeah, okay, I'm we need to do this. When we do this next biennial budget, I want to see more money in this area, and this area, and this area, or different ways of doing these kinds of things. Have you begun to coalesce those thoughts about the things you want to see in that new budget that you're going to get your hands all over with later in the year?
Well, rather than starting to talk about what my pet projects might be in a future budget, I want to get a good grasp on what's happening with this budget, where the monies have been invested and how they've been allocated, and then figuring out what do we get for that. So if we gave X amount of money to a certain department or division, then were they able to run efficiently? Were they able to meet their agendas and do their duties with what we've got? So part of what we've been doing as new council members, and I'll give the city manager credit for this, is we have something we affectionately call it Monday School, where each of the departments have come in on a Monday afternoon, new council members meet there, and we get an overview of this is what this department does, this is our agenda, this is what we're charged to do, this is what we would like to do. And here is our budget, and here's how it's allocated, here's what we see as a preferred budget as we move forward. And then they make their case about why what worked, what didn't, and what we should continue to invest in, and also what we should look at differently. So we've run through that entire cycle. So for me, it's very important to find out what's already happening and not make any assumptions about something that's not being done. It's pretty easy to come in as a new person and say, well, we're going to do this, 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 and this. Once there's a lot of moving parts in this city and there's some things that are already happening, let's find out what's already happening, what's already working, what we need to continue to support, and then from there start looking at what do we need to add in here with regard to new projects or new investments. And I think we owe the taxpayers that, to make sure that we do due diligence in researching where their tax dollars are being spent.
All right. Well, and you mentioned police, and I know that's been trying to rebuild the police department from the cuts it took during the recession era and after has been a priority for before you came on the council. Other council members have talked about that. But I had the sense that there were some structural things that were kind of holding that back, and that we were having a wave of retirements in the police department that was happening just about as fast as we could get people on through the rigorous process that they go through for screening and then for training, which of course we want that to be the case with a job as important as a police officer. And then there also was the fact that we're not the only police agency trying to recover from the recession, and so there's lots of competition out there for people who want to be police officers. I mean, is that kind of the thing that you've heard too, that there are some structural things that have kind of we frustrated our attempts to rebuild the department as quickly as we might want?
All of what you just said is accurate. As people were coming on, people were exiting out the other end. One of the things that played a role in that is, and this isn't often publicized, is that the police union went without a contract for about 2 or 3 years. It was an extended, convoluted process. They kept renewing the contracts and memorandums of understanding there. And there was a great uncertainty into what the new contract would look like. So it inadvertently incentivized individuals who were getting towards the retirement age to speed that up, because at least they knew what the current contract and what their benefits and options would be. And they didn't want to stick around for an unknown that might inadvertently harm them in their retirement. And you can't fault them for that. No. So to the city manager's credit and also with Local 6 and various parties, they now have they've come to agreement on a collective bargaining agreement, which is a very good thing. And that's going to stabilize, I believe, that exodus at the other end, because now it's clear what's happening or what will happen, what the dynamic is. So that's one step in stemming the tide of people going out. Also important is you have to understand, in that competitive world of good candidates for a police force, if we show up as a city saying, hey, we want you to come to work for us, oh, and by the way, we haven't had a contract for 3 years and we don't know where it's going, and we can't really tell you what your salary is going to be or what your benefits will be. There's no secret why people would just, well, let us know when you've got it figured out. In the meantime, I'm going to go over here. So that detail there is significant, that contract issue has been resolved, is really going to impact how we stabilize the staffing at the police force there. I'd like to see perhaps the recruitment outreach revisited. I think there might be a more effective way to do that, as well as a more effective way to maybe shorten the timeline of when an interested candidate presents and goes through that very important vetting process. If we can't perhaps shorten that timeline somewhat in some fashion without compromising the values and the level of and the expectations of a police officer in the city of Tacoma.
Right, and those are all great points, and I think there was another one that the legislature finally dealt with in this last year, which was in Washington State, you could not be a police officer unless you were a citizen of the United States. Now, you don't have to be a citizen of the United States to fight in the United States Army. You can fight and die for this country and be buried in Arlington National Cemetery without being a citizen, but you couldn't be a police officer in Washington State unless you were an actual citizen. You have to be a legal resident, but you don't have to necessarily be a citizen. That's how the law was changed. So a legal resident if the city can do the background check and get not everybody who's not from here we will pass the background check, because we just can't do the checking in some places.
Right.
But if we can get a background check that's satisfactory, you don't have to be a citizen necessarily to become it's not going to expand the pool by a huge number, but it was one of those artificial things. Other states allow people who are not citizens to serve as police officers. Washington is one of the handful that didn't, and it didn't make any sense, especially when you think about, gee, you can sign up and join the Army if you're not a citizen of the United States.
Happy to have you risk your life in that regard.
Yeah, but not to serve the community you've chosen to live in, even though you haven't completed citizenship yet. As you pointed out, it took 14 years in your case. So it seems like there's a lot of little steps we maybe, like the Local 6 contract, that we're just kind of harming our abilities to get things back up to where the community wants them to be.
Well, and you've just given an example of the unintended consequences of good intentions. Someone said, we want our police force to be citizens. Well, that just sounds so good until you drill it down for the very reasons that you just described. Right. I know that in my experience, my parents were both eligible for gainful employment while we were in the immigration and process. And we were legal residents and we were seeking citizenship. Having gotten to citizenship didn't make my father a better bricklayer. He was still really good at it. And so if we've got someone who's gone through the process, is here legally, and is pursuing that, I think those are excellent. Those individuals would be every bit as good a candidate as anyone else there. So that little nugget from Washington State, did not know that till just this moment. So I appreciate. See, I learn every day in this job.
Yeah, as do I. I mean, that's the things why I keep doing it, because there's always something new.
The things that make you go,
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So as a citywide council member, when I've asked citywide council members this question before, I want to see if your answer is consistent. Some citizen doesn't necessarily know that you represent the whole city. They say, you're a council member, I have this issue that's a really big issue to me, and I'm hoping you can help me with this. In the past, people have said, what I usually do is I pass that on to the district member who represents that area, and ask them to work on that, because this really is their district that's coming from. Is that how you plan to do this? Or are you going to just say, no, I want to take these things on myself. If this person came to me, I'm going to handle this.
Well, I have my own version of that, and if I have a citizen that lives in, let's say, district number 2, that contacts me, here is our concern. Number 1, I welcome the phone call, I welcome the communication. And my response to that is to go back and include the representative from District 2, right now is Justin Camarada. And then once I've shared the information, my approach is, how do you want to proceed? Do you want to take a lead on that? Do you want me to take a lead on that? But we're going to work together so that the right hand knows what the left hand's doing.
Okay.
Because what I want to avoid is a situation where if they've gotten not an answer that they didn't want from one council member, now they start working another one. We're working collaboratively on this. There's no secrets in how we move forward, and there's not going to be any deals that are cut someplace else. So I'm very determined and committed to working collaboratively with those council members, but not just foisting something off on them, like this is your problem, not mine. I help give the perspective of how it's working in other districts. I help, I believe, give gentle reminders that it's about the entire city, not just about one district there. And I think that's helpful for the council members of the individual districts as well. So a little version of that. Call me, I'm happy to take the call. Let's do some problem solving together, clearly identify the problem, engage in problem solving, but we're going to include your district representative there, and then we'll see who takes the lead and how we can get to resolution quickly, effectively, and fairly.
Right. Has it surprised you how many outside agencies are involved in the things you try to work on as a city council member? I mean, we don't control the parks in Tacoma. It's a separately elected government that controls the parks. Obviously, the schools are always independent in Washington State. But we have a housing authority that deals with housing issues in Tacoma and has tools. Even though the mayor appoints the board of that housing authority, it's different. Even some of our utilities, not all of our utilities, but some of our utilities are under direction of a board that has first right of action before the council gets it. Has it surprised you that Tacoma's got a lot of other agencies that are involved in the decisions you get to make as a council member?
Well, I knew that there were a lot of moving parts to what makes a city run, and our Monday orientations, Monday school is helping us understand that. So it's interesting trying to figure out who does what, who has jurisdiction, and then again, going back to the model I just described, what are the issues that we need to collaborate on? How can we both have input and share, because we're both all parties are interested in the outcomes here. So it is interesting how many agencies are involved, and where that becomes most apparent is in the Port of Tacoma. There's now we have multiple players who are affecting decisions there and who have jurisdiction, who don't, and some who think they have jurisdiction but don't. That's the one where it gets very interesting. Right. But having said that, I think it's helpful to have different agencies with their areas of expertise. One agency or one institution or one city cannot be all things to all people without it just becoming a monolith that's a bureaucracy that's not manageable. So I think there's something good about having a little bit of separation so that when we start to deal with issues, we have different perspectives and understandings as we come to the table. So there's things that maybe as a city or city representative we didn't know, we didn't think of. And so it's important that we get the impact or the input of those outside agencies. It's equally important that we understand, have established a good working relationship so that there's no assumptions about who has authority, who has jurisdiction here, and how do we move forward in functioning in our decision-making process.
All right. And with that, we are out of time.
Wow.
Isn't that fast?
Yeah.
That's amazing. So I hope it was painless enough that you'll come back.
Okay.
All right, good. Our guest has been City Council Member Lillian Hunter. We look forward to seeing you next time here on Inside Tacoma.